An outdoor kitchen setup can be as simple as a spot with a portable pizza oven or as complex as a custom built in cooking area complete with all the mod cons and seating. There are many different ways outdoor kitchens can be built and designed depending on your needs, wants, and budget. But first, be sure to check local building regulations regarding outdoor kitchen construction and possible restrictions, especially fire safety requirements, as these could influence your design decisions. As a cooking and entertaining hub all in one, consider these things for your own design. Let's talk about the essentials. The grill is an ideal place to start when it comes to deciding the layout and should be the feature of the kitchen. You will find some videos on YouTube of people removing the grill portion of their unit and lifting it into the frame that they've built. I'll talk more about this later in the video. Alternatively, you can build space for a Kamado oven like I have. Access doors. If you need to consider an access panel for a propane tank underneath your grill, this is the next consideration. If you have a gas tank, though, you need vents. Vents. Let's not forget that backdrafts, flare ups, and exploding charcoal do happen. If the barbecue you're using is fueled by propane, you need a vent out the back or the side to allow for any trapped air to escape. Natural gas is lighter than liquid propane, so some people will opt to put one vent behind the grill, either high or low, depending on the gas type. However, why risk it? I recommend placing one high and one low. Think about perhaps adding a side burner, which could prove useful depending on what you intend to cook outside. This can be as simple as a camping cooking stove or a more advanced setup depending on your skill level. Again, side burners will need more venting and always consider safety and take advice before doing anything that involves gases and fires. Do you want to prevent having to run in for anything? Or maybe you want a refrigerator, a bin, or a sink? Be sure to design this into your plans too. I made sure to consider all of what we've just talked about as I started to put pen to paper. I made a few initial drawings, but ultimately, this is the one I worked off the most. It's professional looking, I know. My daughter, who was 7 at the time, also drew me a picture of what she thought it should look like too, which was super cute. And she actually wrote, Part 2 includes marble. My design ended up being worked into two units. I've attached these drawings in a PDF for you. The designs cost me around a tenner to have drawn up, and I've added the designer link on the materials list. Unit 1, the bigger unit, will house the grill, and then I'll use Unit 2, the smaller unit, for prep and the sink area. Once your diagram is ready, you want to start building it in your head. This will avoid any problems further down the line, trust me. Remember that you're literally adding to the floor plan of your home here. Your outdoor kitchen is an extension of your house, a gathering spot for friends and family, and a place to make memories, so have it the way you want it. My advice to you is to think about what you will be cooking and who will be there. Let's start our project by cutting our boards now. You want to get all of your materials together in the area where you are doing the work. I started building my outdoor kitchen during the summer, so the majority of this build occurred outside. First up is measuring the boards. You want to make sure you are measuring each cut at least 2 times, not only for accuracy, but also to avoid as much wastage as possible. I used a set square to mark across my board so I knew where to line up my saw. I'm using a sliding miter saw to make all of my cuts for the frame, as you can set it up to cut at a perfect 90-degree angle. Accuracy is everything at this stage, because if your frame is not square, then everything else will be out, so constantly check your angles. A circular saw is also a great power tool for this job. Jigsaws, although an essential tool in your toolbox, are best for cutting shapes and curves in wood, so I wouldn't recommend using a jigsaw for this particular job. I'm laying all of the pieces on the ground so I can clearly see what I've already cut and what needs to be cut. I'm using pressure treated timber as it's more resistant to moisture and decay, while cedar is another excellent option for outdoor use. I purchased these from my local timber yard as mine prioritizes quality over quantity and they were open to negotiate on price. It's easy to stick to a budget building your own outdoor kitchen as you won't be paying for labour. Sourcing materials, doing research, errors and mistakes all add up to the satisfaction level once it's all completed and you're spending time with your family in your custom made outdoor kitchen area. In this video here, you can really start to see the footprint of the kitchen, which is another reason why I laid all the boards out on the floor. I'm using these long pieces of lumber, so I advise you to use sawhorses or other supports to stabilize the wood and prevent it from falling when you're cutting. After each cut, you simply measure up and continue to cut. This is the fun part of the build for me, it's working with wood. Make sure that your non-cutting hand is far away from the blade. If a wood knot suddenly jolts the machine, it could pull the wood in and your fingers with it. I'm sorry I haven't got gloves on here, I should have. Be sure to sand the rough edges. I haven't shown it on the video, but it's an extra step that is worth the effort. Smoother surfaces makes construction slicker and prevents splinters and potential injury. Caring about the parts unseen is what will set your work apart. Don't be afraid to sweat the small stuff. Doing small tasks might seem easy to skip, but they're just as easy to accomplish. It sounds corny, but the extra effort you put into your kitchens will affect how satisfied you feel when you finish your project. Now we've cut the boards, let's start building out the frames. Now all of your wood pieces are cut, you can start to assemble your frame. Building a sturdy frame is crucial for the structural integrity of your outdoor kitchen. And can I tell you something? This exact frame I'm playing around with here is literally the very first frame I ever put together. So if it's within my reach, it's certainly within yours too. When you are attaching pieces of wood together, like this, you can simply drill pilot holes and then screw in your screws. That's the easiest form of joining two pieces of wood together. The most important thing to remember when assembling your frame is to ensure you have 90-degree angles everywhere. Check this at every point with every screw. And listen to this, make sure your measurements are the same from corner to corner. And let me tell you why. First is, if you don't have the weight distributed evenly, then you will have weak points. And uneven weight distributions compromise the structural integrity of the frame. Secondly, as I mentioned in the last video, is that having all angles square means subsequent elements of the build fit correctly. Not to mention having the overall look of the frame looking super professional. It will also save you time, as you won't be having to fix problems later if everything fits together correctly now. You can see here as my husband attaches the support bars across that he is pre-drilling first. Always pre-drill holes to prevent the wood splintering, and then drive in your screws, making sure they are suitable for pressure treated wood, like coated exterior sunken screws, as they're better than stainless steel, which some other guides might recommend. We had gotten this far in the project, but it was at this point that I got a message back from Kamado Joe to say that they were willing to gift us one of their grills. So we dismantled what we had done and started cutting new boards to make room for the bigger grill that was en route. At this point, I was still keeping the Kamado Joe a secret from my husband, so I didn't tell him why I needed to cut new boards to make the kitchen bigger. And the good thing about our relationship is that he never asked. This is me explaining the new plan to my husband about why I made the first unit bigger. He couldn't care less, but he listened like an attentive husband. And then it happened. We had the delivery for the Kamado Joe. I'd sent out 16 emails to company asking for collaborations on this project, and Kamado Joe were the 16th that I tried because I didn't think I had a chance. My husband had zero clue this was arriving, so I was so excited to show him when he got home from work one warm summer evening. He's definitely in shock, and he comes to where I'm standing off camera for a kiss. He booked himself onto a Kamado Joe cooking course and ordered a barbecue thermometer right after this, so I know he was pleased. I was then ready to go vertical on this build. I opted to assemble everything to get us vertical using pocket hole joints, which are strong and durable joints. Craig do a number of different jigs, and so I purchased their very popular pocket hole jig kit, complete with matching pocket hole screws and a clamp. This makes this type of joint a lot quicker and easier than a mortise and tenon or a dovetail joint, and for beginner DIYers it's really easy to use. To begin, secure the Craig jig onto the pieces of wood you intend to drill into using a clamp. Then attach the massive pocket hole drill bit to your drill and proceed to drill into the wood. I said drill a lot. If necessary, switch your drill to reverse mode and retract the bit after drilling is complete. This was very satisfying seeing the frame go vertical. Use wood adhesive first as it creates a stronger bond than nails. You can get waterproof wood glue, which I will link in the materials PDF with all the other materials I've used in this build, which will be underneath every video in this training. There's nothing like working outside once the weather cooperates, which it often doesn't in the UK. At this point, you keep drilling your pocket holes and continue to assemble your frame. Keep assembling your frame despite distractions. My son was 4 at the time of filming this and he wanted his mummy, so we had some cuddle time, and you can see him here adding the wood glue to the joins before we added screws. The wood glue is a very important stage and it's worth doing right. I'm gluing these support bars into place before I drive in the screws. If I could only use wood glue or nails, I'd actually choose the glue as it forms a stronger joint. You want to create a frame that is going to properly support the plywood we're adding in the next video. This will prevent sagging or warping, or else your kitchen won't last one winter. One last little video from my daughter here, who I also taught to pocket hole on this project. She wants everyone to know that you should wear your protective eye gear whilst working. The frame is built so you can add your casters to the bottom to make the units easier to move around and move undercover in case of bad weather. Rot is a major consideration when working with wood, and other than mobility is the main reason I'm raising the frame onto casters. Once the frame is upside down, I can start drilling pilot holes in the wood before we add the screws. Notice that these are not sunken head screws, as we want them to sit on top of the metal plate. These screws come in the caster pack, so don't worry about buying them separately. They also feature a foot-operated brake mechanism, allowing you to lock them simply by standing on them. These casters are heavy-duty ones from Amazon that can hold up to 1,200 pounds in weight. Having these units on wheels now is going to make the rest of the build easier. If you are building a fixed structure on the floor, be sure to add PVC pads or rubber feet underneath the frame to lift it on the ground. It's going to be important for airflow and drainage. We're really making good progress now, but before we can move on, there were two areas on the frame that I really wanted to make sure were supported properly. And those were underneath where the Kamado sits on the bigger unit and the sink area on the smaller unit. The frame opening was cut wide enough to allow space for that large Kamado grill, and then I started building the support bars, which are going to sit underneath the grill area. The whole thing needs to be level, so we are off to a good start here. I cut lots of these small wooden soldiers to support the Kamado from underneath. I pocket holed each one and screwed 2 nails into each so they were properly secured in place. You can use other methods like cross beams, brackets, or adjustable supports. Just make sure you are adding extra support somehow. The Kamado Joe weighs 230 pounds on its own, so will be even heavier when filled with charcoal. Therefore, using lots of support points, if properly leveled, is going to help distribute the weight evenly across that frame. I sunk some screws into the board of plywood that I put on top of them all and checked all was level. Moving on to the sink area now, I'd placed 4 support bars vertically, and you can see I've got these 4 wooden bars to go horizontally for extra support. These are going to sit underneath the sink, like in this video here. It's upside down, so you'll have to use your imagination here, but once it's all turned back upright and inserted into the frame, you can see that the sink is going to be fully supported. Sinks are heavy, especially when filled with water. Without proper support, the weight of the sink can cause the surrounding frame to sag or even collapse. And a well-supported sink will enhance the stability of the countertop, reducing the likelihood of movement over time, reducing those risk of leaks. I went back to my sliding miter saw to make some adjustments to the length of the boards. I was ready to drill pilot holes and then secure them all in place with wood glue and screws. Now both of these areas are ready, let's move on to boarding out the frame. Let's start boarding out the bigger of the 2 units now. As I've used wood for the frame, I've been able to have complete control when it came to customization of my design. So now we just need to board out the whole thing. For the boarding out, I'm using exterior grade plywood here. 1 centimetre thick plywood is fine to use as there's no foot traffic. Thicker plywood is better if you are going to be walking over it, but we're not, so it's fine. I'm driving screws in first here, making sure they lie flat or just below the surface of the wood. Once the core screws are in, I then go around the outside of each board with my nail gun. You can see me using a jigsaw here to make the cuts. At the time, it was the saw I was most familiar and comfortable with, but with hindsight and having the skills I do now, I would have used a circular saw. Jigsaws are obviously fine, they get the job done, but you will get straighter cuts with the circular saw. It's not worth the effort to cut all of these manually, so if you haven't used a circular saw before, definitely invest in your first one for this job. Never start your tools with the blade touching the wood, and don't stop in the middle of a cut once you start. Just a couple of tips. I'm leaving an overhang here of 5 millimeters all the way around the top as I'm thinking ahead to the finishes of the design now, and the cladding will sit neatly underneath this overhang. Apply pressure to the back of your screwdriver when you're putting the screws in to help guide them in straight. The screws I'm using are all coated exterior grade ones like I did when constructing the frame, which are the best to use for exterior work as you don't want them to rust. No pre-drilling is required like we did with the frame, just drive the screws in and then follow with the nails. You'll notice I own a lot of Ryobi tools and I tend to use those a lot. I find some of their tools lighter, so I just prefer using them. For drilling though, I'd always go with a Makita or a DeWalt. But this Ryobi nail gun I find is a tool in their collection that I choose over any other because it's light but it's so powerful. When you're using a jigsaw, be sure to hold your weight over the front of the saw as you move along with the blade. This is my Makita jigsaw now, which is so good, but on price comparison, if you are on a budget, honestly, the Ryobi cut's just as good. I'm in no way affiliated with Ryobi, but I do want to give honest reviews. The Makita and DeWalt brands are used by lots of professionals who use their tools every day, but for DIYing, Ryobi is great. They're made by the same brand who make Milwaukee tools, if you're familiar with them. I'm cutting this piece out now to board out the floor inside of the cabinets. These will hold heavy barbecue accessories, and my kids will definitely hide in here too, no doubt. So I've used thicker plywood for in here. I'm cutting out slots to fit around the internal framing that we made earlier. These corner cuts are easy enough to do, and this is how you work with the trickier bit in the middle. I've never worked with wood in this way before, but I found it very satisfying making cuts and then slotting them in perfectly. Here it is from a different angle, as that's just really pretty. In the interests of honesty, though, I'll show you a piece that I didn't measure perfectly. I cut around a couple of the frame boards too wide, but hey ho, I fitted it in, nailed it down, and filled in the gaps later. Whilst doing my research for this project, some advice was to leave a 3 millimeter gap around all the cladding for ventilation to avoid moisture buildup. By building gaps into your planning now, you allow moisture to escape and evaporate. The goal is to make sure the wooden frame isn't surrounded by damp air all of the time, otherwise warping or swelling can occur. The sun isn't going to dry out the wood if it gets wet, like it will a wooden deck, for example, and when a frame warps, all of the cladding you've attached to it could potentially pop off. However, I've not done that and will take extra precautions to keep my units dry instead. The reason I haven't done it is because I wanted to fully board out the inside of my kitchen in an attempt to keep any insects or any rodents out of the cabinets. By now, it was great to see the kitchen finally taking shape, even though I was fully aware that there was still a substantial amount of work left to do. I never think about the enormity of the projects I'm taking on or the fact that I've never done them before. If I did, I likely wouldn't start them. I get excited about the finished result and keep that in my mind when things get hard. You may notice that I haven't added any vents. This is because the Kamado Joe grill isn't being built into the unit, but rather sitting on top of it, and it has its own vents. After I had boarded out the whole unit, I went over and sanded the whole thing. I'm sure my neighbours hated me at this stage, but so long as you respect noise levels and aren't out there at all hours of the day and night and are being respectful, I always give my neighbours a heads up too if I know I'm going to be working on projects inside. Just in case you forget like me, the lower the grit, the tougher the sandpaper. So you'd use 40 for smoothing rough materials and shaping wood, whereas 120 is better for general surface prep before painting, and anything higher is a very light sand. Once everything was boarded out, I gave it a good wipe down and a hoover, ready for the next stages. I want to make sure everything is clean for the next step in the process. Let's just have one final look now at how far we've come. This is looking so good, and it's really starting to look like a real kitchen now. I didn't film this step, but when I went inside, I filled all the edging with oak flooring sealant. Now let's move on to the next step, which is waterproofing, which I think was the easiest of all. With your brand new frame all boarded out, let's waterproof both units. Introducing Mapei's Aqua Defense Tanking Kit, which is going to seal out moisture and prevent water damage. And once your surface is sealed, it's going to protect the wood underneath it and all of your hard work. It comes ready to use in this light blue paste. It's a solvent-free resin-based paste, which is so easy to use. It feels like paint, but when it dries like plastic. It leaves a proper watertight finish as it's designed to waterproof shower trays and wet rooms, and you simply paint it on with a brush or a roller. You should aim for a consistent thickness of approximately 8 millimeters when first painting it on. This thickness ensures proper coverage and waterproofing effectiveness. Ensure that the application is uniform across the entire surface, paying close attention to the seams, corners, and junctions for complete coverage and optimized performance. When it comes to ensuring a watertight seal at the corners, this kit includes this tape that you simply cut to size and push into the corners. Once in position, you paint over it with the Aqua Defense paste and you've effectively sealed this area. Sealing these joints in this way is going to ensure you create a continuous waterproof membrane over the whole surface. Now, why is that important? Because we're trying to prevent wood rot. Wood that gets wet can rot. And wood rot is essentially wood that is decaying from fungal growth, so don't skip this waterproofing step. Once cured, this paste is very flexible, allowing it to expand and contract with the wood frame during different weather conditions. While some suggest applying the waterproofing on top of the cement boards, which is the next layer, I opted against this due to concerns about the plastic nature of the cured paste. I worried that adding plastic atop the fireproof layer could lead to heating and melting, and since the instructions on the Mapei box didn't confirm its safety, I chose to waterproof this layer instead. When you get to an external corner like this, you make a cut down the center of the tape and carefully fold one piece under the other like you can see here. Then slosh on the paint liberally to secure it all in place. And you continue just to paint it over the whole unit. An additional step I could have taken was to add a primer to the wood beforehand if it was extremely absorbent material. Be sure to read what it says on the manufacturer's instructions regarding priming. I'm going to go out and say that this is the easiest part of the whole build. Here are two types of fireproofing boards I'm using in my project. The thinner board on the left here is 6mm cement board, or they may be known as non-combustible boards. They can withstand temperatures up to 500 degrees Celsius. The other thicker 50mm material that I'm cutting here is fiberboard. It can withstand temperatures up to 1260 degrees Celsius, so over double that of the cement board, but both are suitable for your project. The fiberboard cuts so easily despite its thickness, as the compressed fibers have a really low density. It kicks up quite a lot of dust, so be sure you're wearing all of your PPE. It's a vacuum formed board, so very strong, but also light for my structure that's on wheels. It has low heat conductivity, so will prevent heat from reaching the wooden frame. This is the plan. I'm adding the fiberboard underneath the Kamado Joe and then adding cement board either side of it. I'm going to link the specific adhesive I used and tell you a bit more about why that is special in this video. But first, as we get the adhesive to the correct consistency, let me take the opportunity to mention an insulation grill jacket, in case you haven't heard of one before. If you are dismantling your existing freestanding barbecue for this project, which is easy enough to do, you simply unscrew it from the base. But let me also tell you that this will void any warranty that you have on your grills. If you do this, you will need an insulation grill jacket to make sure it's properly fireproofed. They stopped the heat dispersing through your outdoor kitchen. You can build your own insulation jacket if you decide you want to take that on, as they are expensive. Now that we've got the mixture to the correct consistency, I can tell you that I'm using polymer modified adhesive to attach the fireproofing to the units. Polymer modified means it will contain plastic in the form of polymers, so it is therefore flammable. But because it contains these polymers, it increases flexibility, so we're adding it under the fireproofing layer. Why does flexibility matter? The materials in these units expand or contract with temperature changes, which your units will be subjected to if you're keeping them outside. Concrete, metal, and wood all expand in hot weather and contract in cold weather, and if a structure can't handle these changes, it can crack or warp. The fiberboard that we're laying down here isn't an essential material, and cement board would have been fine. I took the extra step because my Kamado Joe is so heavy and any excess heat is going to damage and weaken the frame underneath it. So I wanted to make absolutely sure it's properly insulated to keep that frame strong. Just tidying this up here so there's less sanding down to do later. Once we secured that fiberboard in place, we started adding the adhesive to the sides to add the smaller but heavier cement boards. In this video next, my dad is drilling the cement board screws through to the plywood underneath, spacing them out every 15 centimetres. Position the screws at least 2 centimetres away from the edge, but no more than 5 centimetres. We also added the cement board underneath the work surfaces too, as they're extremely strong and won't rot, swell, or warp, so are the perfect thing to put underneath the tiles on top of them from cracking. These boards can last up to 60 years outside, and the 6mm boards I'm using have the same rigidity as traditional 18mm plywood. Now, I'm a DIY and not a professional tradesperson, so my technique here does need to be improved, but I'm never going to improve if I don't get out there and do it. My dad is great at giving me tips, so I'm grateful he only lives down the road as well. Dad and I kept working despite the rain to get the rest of the cement boards in place. There's two more things regarding fireproof before we move on. The first is you can seal the joints with tape like we did with the waterproofing to prevent heat penetration through those gaps, but please use an alkali resistant cement board tape instead of fiberglass tape, as it's made from materials that offer better fire resistance. You can also consider adding a layer of fireproof insulation to provide an extra barrier against heat transfer in between the plywood layer and the cement board layer. Once everything had dried out, we tidied up the edges in preparation for the next stage. The boards sand down almost as easily as wood and can be made really smooth. When it comes to tiling, the first thing I wanted to do was to get the edging on, as it allowed me to make sure everything was square and would remain square, and gave me more control over the finished look. I know people say to add the edging afterwards, but I felt more confident this way. I used black metal edging, so again, completely fireproof. Nothing plastic or flammable goes anywhere near the grill area. After that, I started laying out the pattern for the tiles to avoid ending up with small, awkward cuts in visible areas. I needed an adhesive between the cement boards and the tiles that was going to conduct less heat and also was waterproof to protect it from moisture. So a quick reminder that the materials you use on your project must be specialised. In this case, I used this heat-resistant tile adhesive. I'm smoothing on the tile adhesive around the grill area. You can back butter the tiles too, it's whatever you prefer. I picked up exterior grade porcelain tile on clearance for this project. Porcelain tiles are great for outdoor use as they're hard wearing and also well suited to high traffic areas, so they're used as patio stones a lot too. After the grill area tiles were in place, I moved on to the work surfaces. I made sure that all of the tile adhesive was out of the grooves of the edging, or else the tiles won't lie flat. And after I laid each tile, I checked to see that they were sitting flat and level relative to their adjacent tile. I left an overhang because A, it has a nice aesthetic, but also because I wanted to tuck the cladding underneath it. Once the tile adhesive has properly cured for a couple of days, I moved on to grouting the tiles to ensure a strong and durable bond. I used a special heat-resistant tile grout from a company called Vitkus that tolerates up to 1,000 degrees Celsius. Don't buy fire cement for grouting though, as it will crack. We've done a lot of work to fireproof and protect the inside of our structures, but keep in mind that excessive heat is not as much of an issue as an open flame, so be sure to cover the whole surface with non-flammable material like I have here. If you want to add a sink, take a look here. If not, skip to the next video, which refers to cladding. My dad was fully invested in this project now and cut out the hole for the sink. Thanks, Dad. In true dad fashion, though, he didn't clean up after himself, so I sorted that out. Jokes. You can see here that I've used the rest of the aqua defence to waterproof the boards that are supporting the sink, just in case of leaks. I added the black tile edging first and then started laying out where the tiles would go. You want to make sure you lay down as many complete tiles as you can first. I cut them all in advance so I could get the lay of the land. I then got my dad and father-in-law to help me lift the sink into place. These old butler sinks are so heavy. I found this one on Facebook Marketplace for £20, but it's in pretty bad shape, so I'll be resurfacing it at a later date. Keep an eye on my social media channels for that project. Upcycling is a cost-effective way to add a sink to your unit rather than buying new. Tiling around the sink requires careful planning and attention to detail to ensure a professional finish. The most important thing is to make sure that both sides are symmetrical. I don't think that you can go too wrong with white tile and black grout, and as I didn't have much choice as the tiles were on clearance, I'm glad it looks good. Grilling and cooking in an outdoor kitchen can sometimes be a little messier than the indoor kitchen. It's more fun that way, right? So, having a place where you can rinse things off is so useful. Everyone that doesn't have easy access to a sink always wishes that they had one in their outdoor kitchen, not just for rinsing a plate or a tool, but also for washing their hands. These curved edges took a bit of time to carve out, but turned out really well. I haven't spoken too much on cutting tile in particular, as you may choose to make concrete worktops or use stainless steel maybe. I'll just say that I didn't have to worry about fireproofing on this smaller unit, as there's no direct heat source near it, so there was no need for the fire-resistant tile adhesive or grout, so I used that polymer-modified grout again, and instead of mixing it with water, I replaced it with this grout tile additive, which allows materials to expand and contract with variances in temperature and prevent cracking. I've got a lot of worktop space around this kitchen now, but if your budget doesn't stretch to 2 units, consider bringing in a rolling kitchen cart or a potting bench for additional prep storage and serving space. I'll just talk really briefly now on plumbing a sink. I'd never plumbed a sink before, but the kit I bought came with instructions and I got a certificate from the University of YouTube, so I felt confident to try it. First, thoroughly clean the sink and make sure it's 100% dry. Then pump some translucent silicone around the plug hole and attach the foam washer on top, making sure there are zero gaps. Press it all down so it's level. Once that had dried, you can silicone on top of the foam washer and lay the basket strainer in place on top. Add yet another layer of silicone around that. I left it to dry for a full day and then went back to add the white silicone. This one is a special kitchen and bathroom silicone and has anti-mold properties. I've linked this particular tube from Amazon as they sometimes have flash sales. If you go under the sink, you'll see the long screw that went through the basket strainer. Here's a reminder of what it looked like. Pop it through the top and then place the black rubber gasket up first and then follow with the strainer body. Once these are all in place, you can start attaching your piping. I twisted the pipe in place to make a very simple plumbing system here. So simple that the water runs off into a bucket. But it works, and I technically have a functioning sink now. I've got an end cap for that smaller pipe that's leaking water out the side, so I will sort that out later. Another project that I said I would do later is fix the cracks in the sink to bring it back to its former glory. But for now, it's perfect. I can either wash my hands here or turn it into a giant ice bucket. Building an outdoor kitchen involves many a challenge, including decisions about plenty of small details. And not least is what material you should use for cladding, because that's what everyone is going to see. In the end, to save money, I used what I had around my house, which happened to be these flexible wall panels. They're only 3 millimeters thick, so they're easy to work with and very light, as the whole weight of this kitchen was pretty heavy by now. At this point, your frame should all be level and square, so the cladding should all need to be cut the same length, which for me was 90 centimeters. That meant I had to remove 20 centimeters from each of these panels, and to do that, I used this tool called a Craig Rip Cut, and it allows you to make accurate cuts every time. You attach your circular saw into it, and away you go. Remember when I didn't know how to use a circular saw when I was cutting the plywood for boarding? Well, I taught myself how to use one for this jig, so I now know. You line up the next roll of paneling and away you go. The measurements will be exactly the same every time. To attach it to the kitchen, I'm using a carpet spray adhesive as the back of the panels are made from woven fabric. This stuff shoots out like spider webs. I sprayed the kitchen and then the back of the panel, waited until the glue went a bit tacky, and then pressed it onto the unit. There is a bit of give for a minute or so you can reposition if needed. This worried me slightly as I didn't think that was a good sign, but it has lasted throughout the winter, so it worked. Smooth it out with a towel, not your hand, so you don't get splinters. I bet you can guess how I came up with that golden nugget piece of advice. And then add nails to make sure it's really on there properly. I'll show you in a bit more detail here how to clad around the hatch door we made for the back of the sink area. The main thing you need to do is ensure that the door you create and the boarding out are both totally level with each other. They're both going to be covered with the same cladding, so if they're not level at this point, then they won't be level once the cladding goes on either. And the finishes of a project are so important. I later boarded out under the sink area, and this hatch door is going to be very useful to empty the bucket that goes underneath here. I'm starting to get the paneling on this now, and it's all laying flat around the door, which is really good. Look at how straight this cut is. I love working with this circular saw. Craig are the same company that I used for the pocket hole jig, and they have a jig for everything. Their jigs for doors are also really good. The bigger unit was done exactly the same way, except it had a few more fiddly cuts around the door frames. Let's talk a bit more about the different options for cladding. You want to choose a wood type that is suitable for outdoor use and can withstand exposure to the elements. So the same rules apply when we were discussing the framing materials. Pressure treated or cedar wood is perfect. This cladding here is made from bamboo, so I'm going to make sure I properly treat and protect this material, which I'll discuss in the next video. Each spring or summer, I expect to have to touch up the finish like I would with any outdoor wood surface. All outdoor wood requires regular maintenance to preserve their appearance and helps it last that bit longer. Just know that cladding your outdoor kitchen with wood can be beautiful and durable and withstand the elements and enhance your outdoor living experience. You can have it all. You can see me adding some wooden trim on the bottom of both units here. This is an inexpensive way to finish it all off and gives a more seamless look. The blue door here in the next video was sent in the wrong colour to my parents' house for their kitchen, so I nabbed that. And this hatch style door we made from PDF. It's all looking pretty good, but I'm not done yet. There's one last video on painting, including fireproof paints and sealing of the whole unit for you to watch. Now I know the neutral wood colour does look rather nice here, however I couldn't miss the opportunity to paint it black. It complements the red of the Kamado Joe perfectly, and as I mentioned during the design stage, the grille should be the main feature of your kitchen. First though, I applied exterior wood preserver. It's the ideal treatment and protection of bare timber prior to the application of paint. It protects against wood rot and surface mould. It's the colour of milk and is just drunk up by this bare wood. I added 2 liberal coats 24 hours apart, applied with a brush, not a roller. I worked down the unit again and then got to painting. When it comes to painting, you want to aim to paint on a warm day with the temperature above 10 degrees Celsius. The black paint I'm using is Saddlein Superdeck. It's a highly flexible water-based coating for exterior wood. It's recommended for cladding because the coating expands and contracts with the wood. Touch dry in 1 hour and recoatable in 16 hours. 3 coats are recommended. My son took his job as a painter very seriously. Look at his happy little jig here as he instructed me to refill the paint tray. I chose not to use fire resistant paint, but it is out there, and I'll explain a bit about that now. First, let's ask ourselves, is adding fire resistant paint a compulsory step? In terms of fire safety, if your project is located more than 1 metre away from any boundary and covers an area of less than 30 square metres, it is exempt from any building regulations. But let me explain how fire retardant paint works. It's officially called intumescent paint, and its job is to protect against the surface spread of flame. And the way it works is the paint coating forms a char layer once it reaches a certain temperature that you can chip off if the fire is put out within a certain time period, essentially taking more time for the fire to eat your kitchen. It's worth noting that the heat from your barbecue could actually activate the coating and it will swell. Can I add a layer of intumescent paint now that I've painted mine, you ask? No, I can't, because the intumescent paint has to be applied to bare wood. It is 7 times thicker than ordinary paint, so it doesn't adhere to the surface properly, then it will just fall off when heat is applied. Also, if you choose a brand like Thermogard, then their paints are water-based, and the Saddlein paint I used is water repellent. So it's totally up to you what you decide. You can waterproof and seal the wood from the elements, or use a flame-resistant paint, but it's hard to find a product that will do both properly. If you don't want to paint your unit at all, you can varnish bare wood with exterior varnish, or Thermogard do coloured varnishes and pigments. I was almost done, but just had a couple of finishing touches to make, including adding some hooks that I picked up in B&Q. It's like these ones were made for this kitchen design, right? My mum got my husband a personalised bottle opener, which wasn't her only contribution to this kitchen, as she did a lot of childcare for me whilst this project was going on. These soft closed door hinges were a stroke of genius. And that's it, guys. The bigger unit houses the Kamado Joe and has lots of storage for garden toys and barbecue accessories. And the smaller unit has a working sink and then some more storage. Thank you so much for working through the videos up to this point. The final video is going to show you how both of the units held up over the colder months and talk a bit more about maintenance. We got to enjoy our first beer and meal outdoors, but then the British summertime abruptly ended, and I tucked my hard work away for the colder months. We waited patiently for 6 months, and when spring arrived the following year, I was able to remove the kitchen from its protective dome that had sheltered it all winter. The dome was perfect for shielding the kitchen during winter, but now it was time to assess its condition. Fortunately, everything was still structurally sound, although I did have to get rid of a few areas of mold and rusty handles. That was my fault as they weren't fit for exterior use, so I just replaced those out. The mold was easy enough to tackle as I literally just sprayed some of this product on it and then the mold just evaporates. You just add 1 part of the liquid to 5 parts water in a spray bottle and spray it on. Once you spray, you don't do anything else and it's biodegradable. There were a couple of spots of mold inside, so I got in there and wiped them off with some bleach. That black ring mark you can see there is from the gas canister when it was in place for our pizza oven. Keep gas canisters inside the cabinets as long as you need to whilst cooking, but never store a gas canister inside your unit as it's not safe. I gave everything a good clean, including the Kamado. If you are considering treating yourself to a new barbecue this year, this one cooks everything from pizza to paella. It works like an insulated oven, so you can use them as a smoker or a slow cooker. And you can even bake cookies in them. There was only one thing left to do now that we were spring and summer ready again, and that's to light the coals. We got a spatchcock chicken from our local farm shop, and my husband cooked up a storm. And that is it, you guys. Thank you for joining me on this outdoor kitchen journey that I'm so proud of. I even got the seal of approval from my daughter. I wish you the best of luck and hope you will find me on social media and share your builds with me. I love to see what you get up to. May your outdoor kitchen be a place of joy, good food, and wonderful memories. Happy building and enjoy your outdoor cooking adventures.